for this deep dive, you send us something really interesting. It's this analysis, and it's called AI on the Human Resource Conflict, which is a pretty heavy title.
Yeah, I mean, it gets right to the point, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really does. It's basically what we're, diving into today, right? This kind of push and pull between what we need as humans, what we want, and what the planet can actually provide.
Right. And what I think is particularly fascinating about this analysis is that it's not just, an environmental thing. Like, this AI really goes broad, right? It looks at history, it looks at biology, philosophy, even physics. And it's all about how this core conflict, how it shapes us, how it affects us. It even looks at our state of mind. It's really something.
Yeah, and when you set this in, you specifically mentioned the whole waste disposal thing, like the harmful waste that we produce, and that really stood out to me too as we were going through this. It's such a real world consequence of this whole tension.
Right, like you can't really ignore it. It's right there.
Exactly. So today, what we want to do is kind of, I guess, unpack all this, right? Like, what is this core tension, as the AI calls it? What does that even mean? And how does it affect us, on all these different levels? And why is the waste problem, why is that such a big deal?
Yeah, for sure.
So let's start with this basic idea, right? This core tension. What is the AI actually getting at here?
Okay, so in the simplest terms, I think it's this. Humans have needs, right? Always have, always will. Food, shelter, safety. And then beyond that, we have desires, we want to progress, we want better lives. And to get all of this, we use the Earth's resources. The problem is the AI is really clear about this. Those resources, they're finite.
Right. There's only so much to go around.
Exactly. And the planet can only handle so much of the stuff we spit out,
Yeah.
The byproducts of our consumption, all the weight, there's a limit to how much the Earth can absorb.
It seems almost obvious when you say it like that, right? But the AI, it really emphasizes that this isn't just some environmental niche issue. It's the human condition. It's like this has been shaping us since forever, right? No matter where we are, what culture we're from, everyone deals with this.
Totally. I mean, it's kind of baked into being human.
So if it's so obvious, then why is it so hard to actually solve this, to get a grip on it? What are we missing?
Well, I think that, the concept itself, like you said, it's pretty straightforward. But how it actually shows up in the world today, it can be really sneaky.
Sneaky, huh?
Yeah, sneaky. I mean, think about planned obsolescence. How products are designed to break down so you have to buy more.
Oh, yeah.
That drives consumption way up there, right? It uses more resources and creates more waste. And it's all about short-term profit.
Right.
Or think about food waste. Globally, we waste so much food, but there are still people going hungry. It's crazy.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think that's part of it. This basic tension, it gets buried under, the complexities of our economic systems, our social systems.
So it's almost like we don't see it because it's just so ingrained in everything.
Right, exactly.
The AI gave some really interesting examples from history, to illustrate this whole tension.
Yeah.
What were some of the ones that stood out to you?
Yeah, well, I mean, early human migrations, right? Those were often driven by just the need for more resources, like finding more fertile land, finding fresh water.
Right, basic survival stuff.
Totally. And then so many conflicts throughout history, they're rooted in competition for resources. I mean, whether it's land or minerals or control over trade routes, even the rise and fall of civilizations, that can be tied back to how they managed their resources. If they overexploited what they had, that could lead to collapse.
And it was interesting how the AI pointed out that even advancements, the things that we see as positive, they still have this tension built into them.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Fire, right? Huge benefit for warmth, cooking, but it also led to deforestation.
Mm-hmm.
Agriculture, allowed us to settle down, grow more food, but then we started altering the landscape in a really big way. And then, of course, the Industrial Revolution, right? I mean, so much innovation, but also all this pollution, this rapid depletion of resources.
It's a double-edged sword, right? Every advancement, it's like we're pushing that tension a little further.
Yeah, it's a fascinating way to look at history. And what's really interesting is how the AI, it kind of takes this simple idea, this tension, and shows how it connects to so many different things. It's not just history, it's everything.
Yeah, it makes you think about things in a whole new way.
Totally. So let's get into some of these other angles, right? How does this tension, this resource tension, how does it play out in human time, in history, like beyond those big examples you just gave?
Well, the AI, it basically says that this tension, it's a driving force behind change, historical change. It pushes us to innovate, right? Because we're always looking for new ways to find resources, to extract them, to use them more efficiently. And when things become scarce, we got to find substitutes. It also it creates these societal pressures. Yeah, like sometimes we cooperate to solve these resource problems. Other times it leads to conflict. But it's all part of shaping, our political systems, our social structures, even our values. And it happens over time. It's a slow burn.
So it's kind of like this constant background hum,
Right.
that's always there influencing things.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so what about the biological perspective? Like, how has this struggle for resources, how has it shaped us, as a species, as humans, through evolution?
Right. Right. Well, if you think about evolution, about natural selection, the AI is saying that, those individuals, those groups that were better at surviving, better at getting resources, they were the ones that passed on their genes.
Right, survival of the fittest.
Yeah, exactly. And our basic needs like food, water, clean air, that connects us directly to the environment. If the environment's messed up, we're messed up. And then, we're changing the environment too.
Right, through our resource use.
Yeah, like with climate change. And those changes, they can put new pressures on us. They affect our health, our ability to survive. It's like this feedback loop.
It's a good reminder that we're not separate from nature, right? We're part of it.
We're totally intertwined, yeah.
Okay, so philosophy. This seems like a big one.
Oh, yeah. This is where things get really interesting.
So how does this tension, between our needs and resources, how does it fit into philosophy?
Well, I mean, it's at the core of so many big philosophical questions, like what is our place in nature? What are our responsibilities to the environment, to other living things? Do we have the right to use resources however we want? And if so, like, what are the limits? And then there's the question of future generations, right? Like, what do we owe them?
Yeah, that's a big one.
And, different philosophical schools of thought, they have very different answers to these questions. It's a whole debate.
And you can see how those different beliefs, those philosophical ideas, they play out in the real world, right? Like how different societies approach environmental regulations, how they manage resources.
Absolutely. It all comes back to those underlying beliefs.
Now, this is one I was curious about. Physics and math.
Okay, yeah.
They seem, I don't know, a little less directly connected to this whole resource tension thing.
Yeah.
So how do they fit in? I know the AI mentioned something about thermodynamics. What's that all about?
Right. So thermodynamics, it's basically about how energy is transformed, how it's transferred. And one of the key principles is that, like, nothing is perfectly efficient. When you convert energy, you always lose some of it, often as heat or waste.
So even our most efficient systems, they're still creating waste.
Yeah, even renewable energy, you need materials to build those systems, and there's still some waste involved. It's unavoidable.
Interesting. And what about math?
Well, math, mathematical models, they're super important for measuring the impact of our consumption, like how fast are we depleting resources? What are the consequences of different levels of pollution? Math helps us model those things, predict them.
So it's about understanding the limits,
Yeah.
right? And using data to try and see what's coming down the road.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, logic.
Right.
Okay.
So logic, it's all about cause and effect, right? If we do A, then B is likely to happen. Like if we keep burning fossil fuels, then we can logically expect more greenhouse gases, right? It's about using reason, using analysis to understand the consequences of our choices.
So like if we make this choice about how to use this resource, we can logically predict what's going to happen in the environment.
Exactly. And hopefully that helps us make better choices.
Right. Now this is a really interesting one to me, the state of mind part.
Yeah, this one's really fascinating.
How does all this tension, this struggle with resources, how does it affect us mentally?
Well, the AI, it basically says that there's a direct link between how much we have, the quality of what we have, and our mental state. So scarcity, like, not having enough clean water, not having enough food, or even just not living in a healthy environment, it can lead to stress, anxiety, and even conflict.
Right. Like if you're constantly worried about where your next meal is coming from, you're not going to be in a good headspace.
Exactly. But then on the flip side, if you're living in a clean, resource-secure environment, it can bring a sense of peace, security, well-being.
Right.
I mean, think about how you feel when you spend time in nature, right?
Oh, yeah, totally. Like it's a completely different feeling being in like a polluted, crowded area versus
Mhm.
being out in a forest or by the ocean.
Exactly. It has a real impact.
Okay. And then the last one, belief systems.
Right. So, how do our religions, our cultural beliefs, how do they intersect with all this?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Well, a lot of belief systems, they have this idea of stewardship, taking care of the natural world,
Mm.
or they see nature as having intrinsic value. And many have this idea that there will be consequences for harming the environment.
Karma. You could.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
and those beliefs, they can really shape how we interact with the environment. Like think about indigenous cultures, with their deep connection to the land, their emphasis on harmony with nature, or, religious teachings that emphasize the importance of caring for creation. It all provides a kind of a moral framework for environmental responsibility.
Right. It's like a guidebook for how to live in the world.
Yeah, in a way. Yeah.
So it's pretty amazing how this one basic idea, this tension between our needs and resources, how it runs through so many different parts of our lives.
Yeah.
From history to our own mental health. It's really mind-blowing.
It really is.
So let's zoom in a bit now, okay,
Yeah.
and look at the effects of this tension.
All
Like,
right.
how does this impact us, starting with individuals and then, going all the way up to how the whole world reacts to this.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
So individuals, people like you and me, how does this tension, how does it show up in our everyday lives?
Well, I mean, most directly, it affects our health, our survival. Like, we need clean water, we need food, we need clean air. And when the environment is degraded, like, when there's pollution, our health suffers. And then there's the economic side, too. Like, if resources become scarce, it can be harder to make a living, and people can even be displaced from their homes,
Yeah.
because of environmental disasters.
Right? Like if your farmland is ruined by drought,
Hmm.
you're going to have to go somewhere else.
Exactly. So it's real. It's not just some abstract idea.
It's very real, yeah. And it's not just about individuals, right?
Yeah.
Like what I do, it affects the people around me, my community.
Oh, absolutely. These environmental problems, they don't stay in one place, right?
Ah.
Like pollution from a factory, it affects the whole neighborhood. Water contamination, it can spread. And then when resources are scarce, it can lead to inequalities, even unrest, within communities.
Yeah, if people are fighting over scraps, things are going to get messy.
Exactly. But, the flip side is that when we work together to be more sustainable, those benefits, they also spread, right? Like everyone benefits from a healthier environment, a more resilient community.
Right, so it's like we're all in this together, whether we like it or not.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay, so zoom out even further now. The whole world.
Okay.
How has the world, especially with everything becoming so globalized, so interconnected, how has it reacted to this growing tension between what we need and what the planet can give us?
Right. Well, the AI points to a kind of a progression. Like at first, the impact of, what we were doing, it was mostly local. But as the population grew, as we became more interconnected, these environmental problems, they started crossing borders. And so we've seen these international agreements, these organizations, trying to tackle things like climate change and biodiversity loss. And a lot of countries, they've put in environmental regulations.
Right, like try to control pollution, things like that.
Exactly. And technology, that's playing a bigger and bigger role. We're trying to find more sustainable ways to do things.
Right, like trying to find ways to use less energy to produce less waste.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's like we're waking up to the problem, but, we're still figuring out how to solve it.
Yeah, it's a work in progress for sure.
Okay, so all this tension, these challenges, they raise some pretty big ethical questions.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, huge ethical questions.
Like what are some of the big ones that the AI brings up?
Okay, so one of the most pressing ones is intergenerational justice.
Generational justice.
Yeah, basically it's about what we owe to future generations. Like, are we being fair to them by using up resources the way we are? Do they have a right to a healthy planet too?
It's kind of like, are we just borrowing the planet or do we own it?
Yeah, exactly. It's a big question.
And then there's the whole issue of environmental justice.
Right. So that's about, who bears the brunt of environmental problems. It's often marginalized communities, vulnerable populations. They're the ones who suffer the most from pollution, who have the least access to clean resources.
It's like the people who are contributing the least to the problem are the ones who are getting hit the hardest.
Yeah, exactly. It's a real injustice.
And then there's the more philosophical question, right? The intrinsic value of nature.
Right. So does nature have value just because it exists, even if it's not useful to humans?
Like, do trees have a right to exist even if we can't use them to build houses?
Exactly. It's a fundamental question, and it shapes how we approach conservation.
And then that kind of leads into the idea of a right to a healthy environment.
Right. So should clean air, clean water, a healthy environment, should that be a basic human right?
Like like the right to food or shelter.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we need a healthy environment to survive, to thrive. So the AI is saying, maybe it should be a right.
And if it is a right, then that puts a lot of responsibility on governments, on individuals to protect the environment.
Absolutely. It changes the whole game.
It's a lot to think about. And it all seems to come back to this basic ethical idea that the AI lays out. Like short-term gain at the expense of the environment, that's wrong. But conservation and restoration, those are the right choices.
Yeah, it's like a moral compass, right?
Yeah.
It's telling us which way to go.
Okay, so let's dive into the waste thing now. Because this is a really clear example of this tension, right? We use resources, we make stuff, and we end up with waste. And the planet can only handle so much of it.
Right. It's like the stuff we don't want, it becomes a problem for everyone.
Yeah, it's like we're trying to shove it under the rug, but it keeps piling up.
Yeah, and it's not just any rug, right? It's the only planet we've got.
Exactly. So the AI gives this list of the really harmful types of waste that we produce.
Yeah, it's a pretty sobering list.
Yeah. Let's go through some of them. So let's start with something we see everywhere, plastics.
Okay, so plastics, especially the single-use kind, they're a huge problem. They basically last forever. They can take hundreds of years to break down, and then they end up as microplastics, which contaminate the oceans, the soil, even our food.
And those microplastics, they can be eaten by animals, right?
Yeah, and that can cause all kinds of problems. And then there's the larger plastic debris, that can entangle animals, or they can eat it and get sick.
Yeah, it's a mess. Okay, what about heavy metals?
Okay, so heavy metals, things like lead, mercury, cadmium, arsenic, you find them in e-waste industrial byproducts. And they're really toxic, even in small amounts.
What makes them so bad?
Well, they can build up in living organisms over time. It's called bioaccumulation. So, like, as you go up the food chain, the concentrations get higher and higher. And for humans, exposure to heavy metals can cause all kinds of serious problems. Neurological damage, kidney problems. It's really bad news.
So it's not just about the immediate effects, it's about how they accumulate, right?
Exactly.
Okay, so hazardous chemicals.
All right, so this is a broad category, right? We're talking about industrial solvents, pesticides, things like that, and they can contaminate our water, our farmland, and that directly harms wildlife. And for humans, exposure to these chemicals can cause all sorts of health problems, including cancer.
And the thing is, there are so many different chemicals out there, right? And they can interact with each other in the environment, which makes it even harder to understand the full impact.
It's a real challenge.
Okay, radioactive waste. This one sounds particularly scary.
Yeah, it is. So radioactive waste, it emits radiation, ionizing radiation, and that can cause radiation sickness, increase the risk of cancer. But the biggest challenge is that it lasts for a really long time. Like we're talking thousands, even hundreds of thousands of years.
Wow.
So we need to find ways to store it safely, to isolate it so it doesn't contaminate the environment.
Right. So it's not just about dealing with it now, it's about dealing with it for generations to come.
Exactly.
Okay. What about medical waste?
Okay, so medical waste, this is stuff like used needles, syringes, anything that could be infectious.
So the main risk is spreading diseases, right?
Right. If it's not handled properly, if it's not treated and disposed of correctly, it can spread infections. So sterilization, containment, those are really important.
Yeah, we don't want another pandemic, right?
Definitely not.
Okay. E-waste, electronic waste.
Right. So e-waste is tough because it has a lot of valuable materials in it, but it also has a lot of toxic stuff. Heavy metals, flame retardants, all sorts of nasty chemicals.
So it's hard to recycle.
It can be, yeah. And a lot of times it's not recycled properly, especially in developing countries. So people are exposed to these harmful substances and they get released into the environment.
It's kind of like we're exporting our waste problem to other places.
Yeah, which isn't fair at all.
Okay, asbestos. I know that's bad stuff.
It is. It's a carcinogen.
Yeah.
If you breathe in asbestos fibers, it can lead to lung diseases, including mesothelioma, which is a really aggressive form of cancer.
And it's found in older buildings, right?
Yeah, so if it's not removed properly, it can still pose a risk.
Okay, and then the last one, POPs.
Okay, POPs, Persistent organic pollutants. These are chemicals that hang around in the environment for a long time. They can travel long distances and they can bioaccumulate, just like heavy metals.
So they're like super persistent.
Exactly. They can mess with the immune system, cause reproductive problems, increase the risk of cancer. It's a whole range of nasty effects.
So it's a pretty grim picture of the kind of stuff we're putting out into the world.
Yeah, it's not pretty.
So given all this, these dangers, what does the AI say is the best way to deal with all this waste?
Well, it lays out a kind of a hierarchy, right? A hierarchy of approaches and prevention, that's at the top.
Prevention, okay.
Yeah, so reducing the amount of waste we create in the first place, being more conscious about what we consume, designing products that last longer, using less packaging.
So like being more mindful about what we buy, about what we throw away.
Exactly.
Okay, and then what?
Then it's reuse.
Reuse.
Yeah, finding ways to use things again instead of just tossing them.
Right, like getting creative.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got reduce, reuse. What's next?
Recycling.
Recycling, right.
So taking materials like plastics, metals, paper, glass, and processing them into new products.
So that's about conserving resources, right?
Yeah. And keeping stuff out of landfills.
Okay. What about composting?
Composting is great for organic waste, food scraps, yard waste. It turns that stuff into soil, which is super valuable.
Right. So instead of it rotting in a landfill, it's actually becoming something useful.
Exactly.
Okay. So what about the waste that can't be reduced, reused, recycled, composted?
Right. So for that, there's energy recovery.
Energy recovery.
Yeah, like controlled incineration. You burn the waste, but you capture the heat and use it to generate energy.
So you're getting something out of it.
Yeah, but it's important that it's done properly with good air pollution control.
Right. We don't want to create more problems.
Exactly. And then the last resort is safe disposal in landfills.
Landfills, okay.
Yeah, but these are, specially engineered landfills with liners to prevent leakage, systems to collect the leachate. And this is for non-hazardous waste. Hazardous waste, radioactive waste that needs special treatment, long-term isolation.
So it's a whole system, right?
Yeah, it's a multi-layered approach.
Okay, so the AI also talked about some of the diseases that can come from exposure to hazardous waste. It's pretty scary stuff.
Yeah, it is. I mean, if you come into contact with medical waste that hasn't been handled properly, or if you're exposed to contaminated water or soil, you can get all sorts of infectious diseases. And then there's air pollution from waste incineration, exposure to asbestos. Those can cause respiratory problems, cancer. Heavy metals can damage the nervous system. Some chemicals can affect development, reproduction. Even just touching some types of waste can cause skin problems. And contaminated food and water can lead to stomach problems, digestive issues. It's a long list.
It really drives home the point that waste isn't just an environmental issue. It's a health issue. It's about people getting sick.
Absolutely. And not just people, right? It's about how this waste affects the land itself.
Right. So how does it damage the environment?
Well, toxic stuff from waste can leach into the soil, contaminate it, make it unusable for growing food. And then there's leachate, that nasty liquid that forms in landfills that can seep into groundwater, which is a lot of people's drinking water. And then landfills themselves, they take up a lot of space, which means habitat loss, disruption of ecosystems. Even plastics, they don't break down easily, so they can change the structure of the soil, affect how well it holds water, which impacts plant growth. It's a lot of damage.
Because that's where the rubber meets the road, right? We're talking about the stuff we produce and how we get rid of it.
Yeah.
And how it's pushing the planet's limits.
Right, like a reality check on all this. So the goal here is to give you a better grasp of this fundamental conflict and why finding a more sustainable way to live on this planet is so crucial.
It's not just about hugging trees, it's about survival, right?
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's go way back to the beginning. Early human societies, they were basically living hand to mouth, right?
Yeah.
Everything depended on their immediate surroundings.
Yeah. They were directly reliant on local stuff, whatever was available right there. Food, water, shelter, just to get by.
And their impact on the environment, it was pretty much limited to their little corner of the world.
Right. Think about small groups of people using wood from nearby forests or getting water from a local stream. They took what they needed, but the ecosystem could, bounce back, replenish itself.
And then, bam, the agricultural revolution hits the scene. Things change big time. You've got settlements popping up, populations growing. Suddenly, everybody needs way more land and water.
It's fascinating, right? Agriculture totally revolutionized human progress. But it also was the first time humans reshaped landscapes on a large scale.
Yeah.
On purpose, I mean. Like cutting down forests to make room for farmland. That's an early example of humans making a trade-off. We need food, but what about the environment? And even back then, those practices weren't always sustainable over time, at least not for the local environment.
Right, right. And then fast forward a bit, civilizations are popping up all over. Now they're all competing for the same resources, the good stuff, fertile land, water sources, all the good minerals.
Absolutely. Access to those resources, they became like the main drivers of social and political change.
Yeah.
It was a huge deal. Think about those fights over fertile valleys back in the day, or all the conflicts started over mineral wealth. These weren't just little disagreements. They often shaped like the rise and fall of whole empires and kicked off major migrations.
Right, people moving all over the place looking for resources.
Yeah, it shows you how important, or maybe how messed up, the whole history of resource availability is. Like, sometimes violent, always powerful.
And then we hit the Industrial Revolution. That's when things go completely bonkers, right? Mass production goes through the roof, and we need so much energy to fuel it all. And all that led to us extracting resources on a scale that's just mind-boggling.
This is where it gets really interesting. The Industrial Revolution, it wasn't just about using more stuff. It was a fundamental shift in what we were using to get things done. We went from renewable resources, things like wood and water power, to non-renewables, fuels, right? Coal, oil, gas. And that, my friend, had some serious consequences. It's like pollution just became the norm, and that's when we really started down the path of long-term climate change. That tension between what we need and what the planet can handle. It accelerated like crazy. Think about it. Before, like, our main energy sources replenished themselves on a human timescale. But with fossil fuels, we're tapping into this finite reserve that took millions of years to build up.
Wow. Millions of years in the making, and we're burning through it like there's no tomorrow.
That's it. That's it.
So that brings us to the modern era, the age of globalization. Economies all over the world are linked together. Now we've got this crazy web of consumption and distribution spanning the entire globe.
It's amazing and kind of terrifying how these global supply chains connect us all, but also make us so vulnerable. Like, imagine something happens on the other side of the world, a natural disaster, maybe political instability, that messes with a key resource. The ripple effects can be felt across continents.
That's a domino effect.
Exactly. And then add in consumer culture, this obsession with always getting the newest thing, planned obsolescence, where things are designed to break down faster. You get this constant demand for more and more and more. Raw materials keep getting sucked up and the mountains of waste keep growing. It's a global challenge with global consequences all tangled up together.
Okay, so we've seen how this whole resource tension has, evolved over time. But let's dig into how it's actually affecting us. Let's zoom in on the biological side of things, the evolutionary angle. It's like we're hardwired to be resource hoarders, right?
In a way, yes. Like, think about natural selection, right? It favored the traits that helped us survive and get those limited resources. Our physical abilities, how our brains work, even our social structures, all that developed to help us cooperate and, get ahead.
So we could outcompete everyone else for resources.
Exactly. But even now, at our core, we still need those same things. We need food and water, clean air to breathe. Our biological needs haven't changed, and those are still dependent on a healthy environment.
And it's not just a one-way street, is it? We're not just taking stuff. We're changing the environment, and those changes come back to bite us.
Absolutely. Think about, like, climate change causing extreme weather, messing with food production, or how pollution causes all kinds of health problems like respiratory illnesses and all that.
Yeah.
Deforestation, it can even increase the chances of new diseases spreading from animals to humans, like what happened with COVID. Our well-being is totally tied to the environment. It's not separate at all. So using resources in a way that doesn't last, that's a threat to our health and, like, maybe even our long-term survival as a species.
Whoa. So that brings up a big question. How should we even be thinking about this whole resource tension thing? What are some ways to frame our relationship with the planet's resources, like ethically and philosophically?
Well, this is something philosophers argue about all the time. They're trying to figure out our place in the world. There's anthropocentric ethics, where the focus is on human needs. It basically sees nature as a big resource for us to use.
Like humans first.
Pretty much. But then there's ecocentric ethics, which says that nature has value just because it exists, whether it's useful to humans or not.
And then there's this idea of environmental stewardship, right? Like, we're supposed to be caretakers of the planet for future generations.
Yeah, stewardship. That emphasizes our responsibility. It's interesting because There's no one right answer here. It's complicated. All these different ethical viewpoints show just how complex this whole thing is and how differently people value resources and environmental responsibility.
Like different ways of seeing the same problem.
Exactly. Think about a debate over building a new dam. An anthropocentric view might be all about the economic benefits for people, while an ecocentric view would focus on how it would harm the river and the ecosystem, even if humans benefit.
Okay, so that's the why, like what our values are. But what about the cold, hard facts? What does science tell us about all this? What are the limits according to like logic and the laws of nature?
Well, the second law of thermodynamics is a big one. It says that every time we use energy or transform resources, some of that energy gets lost as heat. It becomes unusable, and the system as a whole gets more disordered. Like, think of waste as a form of disorder.
So like entropy.
Yeah, that's the idea. So basically, perfect efficiency. It's impossible. We can't use resources without some loss. Think about driving a car. You're burning fuel, right? But a lot of that energy is lost as heat. It just radiates away. That's a fundamental inefficiency that we can't escape, even with super advanced technology.
So we're always going to have some waste, some inefficiency, no matter what we do.
That's what physics tells us, yeah. But on top of that, we also have these mathematical models. We use them to try and understand, predict, see what impact our actions will have on environmental systems. These models are super helpful for looking ahead, seeing the potential consequences of our choices, and making smarter policies. And just basic logic, understanding cause and effect, like if we do X, then Y will happen in the environment. That kind of thinking is essential for finding solutions that work. Science gives us the knowledge to understand the limits and the tools to analyze the impact of our actions.
Right, so it's not all just philosophical and touchy-feely. There are actual physical limits.
That's the reality.
But it's not just about the physical and ethical stuff, is it? Our relationship with resources, it goes deeper, like psychologically and even in terms of our culture.
Totally. Think about how having access to clean water, healthy food, that affects our sense of security, right? It impacts our overall well-being. Scarcity and pollution can lead to stress, even anxiety. But then studies show that being out in nature, it's good for our mental health. It has this calming effect.
Like taking a walk in the woods, it can really chill you out.
Exactly. And culture plays a huge role, too. A lot of religions and cultural traditions have deep-seated beliefs about how nature's sacred, how we have responsibilities towards it.
Like respect for Mother Earth and all that.
Yeah, that kind of thing. What's fascinating is how those beliefs can shape our actions, our behaviors, when it comes to managing resources. They can be like a moral compass guiding us towards more sustainable practices. If we want solutions that really resonate with people, solutions that actually stick, we got to understand these psychological and cultural factors.
So we're seeing how all these different threads are connected. Now, let's zoom out and look at the big picture, the global and local consequences of all this. What's the impact at the individual level, like for everyday people?
Well, for individuals, the impact is often pretty direct, pretty personal. Like, think about access to clean water, nutritious food, clean air. Those are the basics, right? But when unsustainable resource use messes up the environment, individuals are the ones who suffer. They get hit with health problems like respiratory issues from all the pollution or waterborne diseases from contaminated water sources.
Or not having enough food because agriculture is disrupted.
Exactly. Resource scarcity can also mean losing jobs, economic hardship, and in some cases, people even have to leave their homes because the environment can no longer support them. This tension, it's not just an abstract idea, it's a real lived experience for people.
Yeah, it has real consequences. And when you zoom out to communities and societies, those effects become even more widespread.
It's true. These environmental problems, they can really destabilize communities. Public health takes a hit, social ties weaken, and the whole economy can become shaky. And when resources become scarce, especially essential ones like water or fertile land, well, that can make existing social tensions worse. It can even lead to unrest and conflict, both within and between groups. But on a brighter note, when societies prioritize sustainability, when they put those practices into action, they tend to be healthier, more resilient, and more fair in the long run. They're better equipped to deal with challenges.
Right, they're more adaptable.
Exactly.
And of course, all these issues, they're not happening in isolation. What happens locally can have a ripple effect globally and the other way around. So how's the world on a larger scale been reacting to this growing resource tension?
In the beginning, environmental concerns were seen as like local problems. But the world's more interconnected now, and there's this growing global awareness that these challenges affect us all. We've seen international agreements come about, things like the Paris Agreement on Climate Change or the Convention on Biological Diversity. These are attempts to tackle these issues together as a global community. And technology is playing a bigger and bigger role too. Advancements in renewable energy, more efficient agriculture, better waste management, all these things offer potential solutions, ways to mitigate the damage. The fact that these challenges are global, it shows just how important international cooperation is and why we need to keep developing and using sustainable technologies. It's a global effort.
For sure. So all of this brings us to some pretty tricky ethical dilemmas about how we manage the resources we have. Let's start with intergenerational justice. That's all about our responsibilities to future generations, right?
Exactly. It's asking the tough questions like, is it really ethical for us to consume resources and mess up the environment in a way that limits the opportunities of people who come after us?
Yeah.
Can we justify making their lives harder? Sustainability, in this context, means meeting our needs today without jeopardizing the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. It's about avoiding the creation of an environmental debt that our kids and grandkids will be stuck paying off.
Like, we don't want to leave them a mess to clean up.
Exactly.
And then there's environmental justice. That's about how the benefits and burdens of resource use are spread out among different groups in society.
This is so important. It's about fairness. Often the people who are already marginalized, the vulnerable populations, they're the ones who bear the brunt of pollution and environmental damage. That raises some serious ethical questions about fairness and equity. The core idea of environmental justice is that everyone, no matter their background, has a right to a clean, healthy environment. No one should be unfairly burdened by environmental hazards.
Right. It's about equal access to a healthy environment. And we touched on this before, but there's also the idea of nature having intrinsic value, meaning nature has value simply because it exists, not because of what it can do for us.
This is a big philosophical question, right? If we believe nature has inherent worth, then we have a moral obligation to protect it, even if it doesn't directly benefit us, even if it doesn't have some economic value. This kind of thinking has a huge impact on how we approach things like protecting biodiversity and preserving wild areas.
It's like saying nature has a right to exist, period.
That's a good way to put it. And then there's the growing recognition of the right to a healthy environment as a basic human right.
Like, it should be enshrined in law, alongside other fundamental rights.
Yeah, it's a global movement. The idea is that a healthy, sustainable environment is a prerequisite for enjoying all other human rights. If this becomes widely accepted, if it gets legal backing, it will have a major impact on environmental policy and how governments are held accountable.
Yeah, it could change everything. So at the end of the day, it's about constantly checking ourselves, asking, are our actions, especially when it comes to resources, ethically sound? Are we thinking about the long-term consequences for people and the planet?
Exactly. Putting short-term profits above long-term sustainability, that's ethical and questionable, right? But taking actions that promote conservation, restoration, living more sustainably, those are ethically responsible choices.
So let's get down to brass tacks. Let's talk about the crisis of harmful waste disposal. This is a real-world example of everything we've been discussing.
It is. It's a perfect illustration of the conflict between how much we consume and the planet's ability to deal with all the waste we generate. Like, the sheer volume of waste is bad enough, but then consider how much of it is hazardous. It's a recipe for disaster.
So what are some of the most dangerous types of waste out there? What are the long-term environmental impacts?
Well, plastics are a huge problem. They stick around for a long time, breaking down into these tiny microplastics that contaminate everything, our oceans, soil, even the air. And they can harm wildlife. Animals eat them or get tangled up in them, and they might even be carrying toxins up the food chain. And then you've got heavy metals like lead, mercury, cadmium, arsenic. These are super toxic and can build up in living organisms, causing all kinds of problems like neurological damage, kidney problems, all sorts of serious health issues. And we can't forget about the hazardous chemicals from industrial processes and agriculture, things like solvents, pesticides, pharmaceuticals. These can pollute water and soil, harm wildlife, and even increase the risk of cancer and developmental problems in humans.
It's a lot to worry about. And then there's radioactive waste. That stuff's dangerous for, like, an incredibly long time, right?
It is. It's a major headache. We need secure, long-term storage to prevent leaks and exposure because it can cause radiation sickness and increase the risk of cancer. And medical waste, that's another one. It can spread infectious diseases if it's not handled properly. And e-waste, all that electronic junk, it's full of toxic substances. If it's not recycled properly, it can expose workers and the environment to harmful stuff. And then there's asbestos. It's still found in a lot of older buildings, and it's a known carcinogen. And POPs, persistent organic pollutants, they're really troublesome because they're toxic, they hang around in the environment for ages, and they can build up in the food chain. It's a whole lot of hazardous stuff we're dealing with. POPs, just to clarify, are these chemical substances that persist in the environment, accumulate in the food web, and can cause all kinds of problems for human health and the environment.
Wow, it's a scary list. So, how are we dealing with all this waste? What methods are we using, and how effective are they in the long run?
There's this hierarchy of waste management strategies that most experts agree on. At the top, the most effective approach is waste prevention. Basically, trying to create less waste in the first place. Next is reuse, finding new ways to use things instead of just throwing them away. Then there's recycling, which is super important for keeping stuff out of landfills and conserving resources. Composting is a great way to deal with organic waste, turning it into something useful. Then there's energy recovery, burning waste to generate energy, ideally with good pollution controls. That can be part of the solution too. And lastly, there's safe disposal in landfills. That should really be the last resort, only for non-hazardous waste that can't be managed any other way. And then hazardous and radioactive waste, well, that needs special treatment and secure long-term storage. The key is to focus on reducing, reusing, and recycling as much as possible. That's how we move toward a circular economy.
But it seems like we're still generating way too much waste, and not all of it's being managed properly. What happens to people's health when waste isn't disposed of correctly?
It's a major health hazard. When waste isn't handled right, it opens the door to all sorts of problems. Infectious diseases can spread through contact with contaminated waste or through things like pests that thrive in those environments. Air pollution from burning waste or dust from poorly managed landfills can trigger and worsen respiratory illnesses. Exposure to toxic substances can increase the risk of cancer, cause neurological problems, mess with hormones, and lead to skin and digestive issues. The specific risks really depend on the type of waste and how people are exposed to it.
Right, it's all connected. And the effects on land and ecosystems, they must be pretty bad too.
Oh, they are. They're significant. Toxic substances can leach into the soil, harming the microorganisms that are essential for a healthy ecosystem. And leachate, that's the liquid that forms. When rainwater filters through decomposing waste in a landfill, it can contaminate groundwater. That's a problem for drinking water and aquatic life. Landfills themselves destroy habitats because we're basically paving over natural areas to store our garbage. Plastics can change the physical structure of soil and harm wildlife that ingest or get entangled in them. All in all, improper waste disposal leads to long-term damage, affecting biodiversity and messing with how ecosystems function.
So this is a massive problem. Whose job is it to fix it? Can we put all the blame on one group, or does it require a more shared approach?
It's definitely a shared responsibility. Individuals have a big role to play. We can all reduce our personal waste footprint by making conscious choices about what we buy, using less packaging, avoiding single-use items, reusing and repairing things, and making sure we recycle and compost correctly. We can also support businesses that operate sustainably and push for better policies.
It sounds like businesses and industries have a responsibility that goes beyond just following the basic rules.
Definitely. They need to think about minimizing waste throughout the entire life cycle of their products, designing things to last longer and be easier to recycle, adopting cleaner production methods that generate less waste in the first place, and taking responsibility for the waste they do produce. It's called the polluter pays principle. There's also this idea of extended producer responsibility, or EPR, where manufacturers are responsible for managing their products even after they've been used, including things like collection and recycling. Extended producer responsibility essentially means producers are on the hook for their products from the beginning to the very end.
So they can't just wash their hands of it once the product's sold.
Nope. And governments at all levels, they're also vital. They set the framework and make sure everyone's doing their part.
Right, they set the rules of the game.
Exactly. They need to create and enforce environmental regulations and standards, set targets for waste reduction and recycling, invest in the infrastructure needed for sustainable waste management, make sure hazardous waste is disposed of safely, educate the public about waste issues, create incentives for sustainable practices, and work with other countries on transboundary waste problems and sharing best practices. There's a lot on their plate.
You mentioned the circular economy earlier. Can you break that down a bit more? Why is it seen as such a crucial part of the solution?
So imagine moving away from this linear take, make, dispose model we're stuck in and creating a more closed-loop system. In a circular economy, we try to use resources for as long as possible, getting the most value out of them. Then, when a product reaches the end of its life, We recover and regenerate the materials, minimizing waste and reducing our reliance on virgin resources. It's a win-win. We become more resource efficient, generate less waste, and create new economic opportunities in areas like repair, remanufacturing, and advanced recycling. We're starting to see cool examples of this, like product-as-a-service models, where you pay for the use of something rather than owning it, or industrial symbiosis, where the waste from one company becomes a valuable resource for another. It's about completely rethinking how we view materials and what we consider waste.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, it's clear that the tension we've been talking about, this balancing act between our needs and the planet's limits, it's still the defining challenge of our time. And with all the consumption and waste we see today, finding a better way forward is more urgent than ever.
The whole crisis with harmful waste disposal, it's a wake-up call. It shows how unsustainable our current ways of doing things are. We have to shift to a more responsible, circular relationship with the environment. It's not an option anymore. It's essential for our survival.
Absolutely. We need a fundamental change in our thinking. We need to understand how environmental, social, and economic factors are all connected. And we have to embrace the principles of a circular economy, not just as a nice idea, but as something we put into practice.
We need to take a holistic approach, seeing how everything interacts and influences everything else.
So here's a final thought for everyone listening. As you think about all these interconnected responsibilities, from your own everyday choices to the actions of global industries, ask yourself, what one change in mindset could make the biggest difference? What could really tip the scales and help us create a truly sustainable future? A future where our needs and the planet's limits can exist in harmony. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
This is DigitView.